Hey guys, this is EckhartsLadder. Hello and welcome to another Star Wars The Bad Batch review episode. As always, for these episodes, or as recently at least, for one, I've got my daughter, so expect to hear some baby noises. They're usually pretty cute, but some of you find it distracting. For two, we're going to spend most of the video talking about one central theme or idea, and then at the very end, I'll include my more general review. The beginnings of each section will be marked down below, so if you don't want to watch a certain part, you can find the timestamps there. Alright, let's get started, and of course, full spoiler warning. So let me just put it out there. I was wrong about this episode when I was predicting what would happen. And not like a little bit wrong, really wrong. I was guessing that we would have an episode without Omega, that the Bad Batch would be tracking down Fennec Shand, and that it would be a few episodes at the very least until they encountered and rescued Omega from Cad Bane. Of course, as we'll discuss later, some of that did happen, but the biggest revelation for me actually came in the scope of the Kaminoan cloning process and their true motivations being revealed. I mean, we always knew that Omega was important for some reason at least, and that the Kaminoans were looking for her, but we got more information directly in this episode from Tech, who said specifically that Omega is basically an unaltered clone of Jango Fett, very similar to Boba. You could actually probably call her Boba's sister. So presumably they could create a whole new generation of clones without any sort of genetic deterioration by using that, I guess, prime DNA that she possesses. And after that point, she's pretty much disposable. And in fact, in this episode, that was the plan of the Kaminoans. They were to take Lama Su specifically, take her genetic material, then dispose of her. But as I alluded to earlier, the big thing for me that we learned was actually the scale of the Kaminoan operation. I don't think Star Wars Legends ever had this, and there weren't any hints of this in canon, but the Kaminoans evidently, at least at one point, had other cloning outposts. We see one in this episode, which is a cool sort of different take on what's going on Kamino, with the buildings in the sky rather than the sea, because I guess it can just never be convenient. But we also see the remnants of past experimentation, and I mean, we know that the Kaminoans had experienced cloning before the Clone Wars. They talk about the Republic's army being their finest yet, but in this episode we see that they were apparently working on a Celestian. They were trying to clone themselves, and I watched the scene again listening to descriptive audio, and it also alludes to the fact that one of the cloning tanks has a man in it, which I took to be a human, but admittedly it could be referring to that first face that she sees. Either way, I don't think the specifics are really important. People are going to try to make the Snoke connection and even the Mandalorian connection. I don't think that's what they're attempting to do here. I don't think that was the purpose of the scene. I don't even think that this scene alone is super important to the plot moving forward. It just is pointing out that the Kaminoans have a life and an existence beyond the Clone Wars, and it's also helping to establish that fear for Omega. But while that room and those specific clones might not be important, as I said, the fact that cloning is still important and being developed, and that, again, there's stuff going on outside of the Clone Wars, that is important. I think we will see that play into other media titles moving forward, especially now in this part of the timeline where the Clone Wars itself is over, and the Empire is moving away from clones into human enlisted stormtroopers. I do wonder, however, whether the Kaminoans' recent cloning efforts produced anything viable, whether they've been cloning their own species, which definitely seems possible, and whether there are other secret bases or cloning sites across the galaxy. With that being said, I want to talk about this episode. I really liked it, as I've liked the past three. I'm not sure if I would have preferred them to extend this conflict a bit longer, the Omega being missing thing, instead of wrapping it up in one episode. I'm curious to see what they do with the rest of the season. I think that will largely shape how I feel about the decision. I do like that there's strife on Kamino, with the majority of the cloners simply wanting to take Omega's genetic material, then kill her, with that one cloner, of course, hiring Fennec to save Omega. I thought that was a really nice and surprising touch. The planet itself was really interesting. That one scene where Cad Bane comes out of hyperspace and flies down through the atmosphere was actually stunning. It reminded me of being on a really high-tech ride at Disney or something, in a good way. And of course, we've got the excellent action overall. I really enjoyed Cad Bane this episode. He was very menacing, but not invincible. He beats Fennec Shand in the end, or at least fights her to a draw, so it's nice to see him not as invincible, especially when fighting with a tricky fighter sort of in his own style. I also really enjoyed the revelation about Omega, and I thought the whole angle of her being afraid to go back to Kamino and discovering that room was very interesting and very dark, especially with how the music choices worked. And of course, I mentioned this earlier slightly, but the visual detail throughout this entire episode is incredible. That one section where Omega loses the plating on her pod, you can immediately see it start smoking and begin to crash. It's just the little details like that aren't being brought out or haven't been brought out in any other Star Wars animated series, and we're really, really lucky to have something so cool every week. I don't have a whole lot more to say. I mean, this episode was fairly straightforward, but it moved the plot forward in a really interesting way as well, and added that extra context to Kaminoan history and maybe also their intentions. So this has been a great 3-episode arc here. It's been probably the best of the show so far. It's just been phenomenal. I will say that so far this has been my favorite first season of any Star Wars animated show, and this arc is up there with any of the first season arcs as well. This video is a little short, so I will end with a hashtag AskEck question, and just a reminder guys, if you have something you'd like me to answer at the end of a future video, leave it down in the comments with the hashtag AskEck. Today's comes from Patrick, who says, very late comment, but I'm revisiting some older videos. This one brought up the question of how Star Wars computer systems would hold up against a Halo AI. AI in Halo, I'm presuming, seems to be magnitudes more advanced than anything in Star Wars, but there's something about Star Wars computer systems, like the fact that they almost seem analog in a way that would keep Cortana from taking over and everything. That's an interesting question. Yeah, I don't think that like the electronic warfare systems of Cortana would necessarily be very useful against Star Wars. It does seem to rely a lot on like physical connections. You always see R2-D2 tapping into things, and that's just because computers are very different in the two universes. It's like, I think about Star Wars coming from the 70s and having that style of computer. The computers themselves are able to do some incredible things. Obviously, they have extremely common artificial intelligence, but it's different. We don't as frequently see AI, for example, running an entire city like we do in, say, Contact Harvest or an entire planet. That was a thing in some occasions in Star Wars, but it wasn't very common at all. We certainly don't see AI managing massive fleets on the scale we do in Halo when we talk about either the UNSC, but especially the Forerunner, who were managing millions or billions or even more ships at one time through a few incredibly intelligent AI. So yeah, from that sense, the smart AI in Halo absolutely outclass most of the artificial intelligence we get in Star Wars based on their capacity for calculations, coordination, and more, but they're different universes, so it's hard to compare. Again, even the most rudimentary droids in Star Wars, power droids, gonk droids, have some degree of intelligence, and the fact that that's so common is really impressive. But guys, that's all I have for today. Until next time, be safe, have a good one, and may the Force be with you.